Good day, everyone. Welcome to. I have echo. Yeah. Yes. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the module reading for social psychology, behavior, and attitude. Have you ever heard of saying that if we want to change ourselves in some critical way, it is best to not to wait for insight or inspiration? Sometimes we need to act, to be, to write that paper, make those phone calls or see that person, even if we don't feel like acting. This module will focus on the idea that attitude follow behavior principle that would offer the above powerful lesson for life. This module also discusses self-presentation and the way we manage the impression we make on others. Objectives, number one, discuss the extent to which and under the condition our inner attitude drive our outward action. Number two is state the theories that seek to explain the attitude follow behavior phenomenon. Number three is summarize evidence that we can act ourselves into a way of thinking. Attitude. An attitude is an evaluate reaction towards something and someone. One's attitude reflects this behavior, affect on cognition or the ABC, but people express attitude can hardly predict their changing behaviors. Thus, even people change their behavior by changing their attitude often fail because behavior is controlled by external factors such as social influence and internal factors such as attitude and personality. Behavior, behavior and expressed attitude are different because both of both are influenced by different factors. This implies that what people say is different from what they do. Dangers of smoking minimally affect the attitude of those who already smoke without affecting a long-term behavior of smoking. Attitudes predicting behavior. To predict one's behavior through attitude, there should be minimal influences on what we say and do. We can also predict behavior in the attitude is specific to the behavior and is compelling. When social media influence on what we say are minimal. Again, when social influence on what we say are minimal. Express attitude can predict behavior when outside influences are minimal. Usually, express attitude are the easiest to measure to a person. These attitudes have two types, explicit or the conscious attitude and implicit, the unconscious. The implicit is the unconscious attitude. For example, for an explicit attitude, you found someone who has similar interests to you. You consciously notice that this is the person that you can get along with. For implicit attitude, If you are out with your friends, but there are strangers around you and seems to feel uncomfortable for no reason. The reason might be the stranger near you reminds you of someone in the past that you dislike. Your attitude is that the unconscious level and is involuntary form. Some tools are used to measure these attitudes. These measures prove that explicit and implicit attitude both predict one's behavior and judgment. This is from Greenwald and others, 2008, Nosek and others, 2007. When attitude can predict one's behavior, if the attitude is strongly related to the behavior that would be tested. For example, health fitness. Again, for example, health fitness is less likely to predict specific exercise practices of a person. But if the attitude is focused more on benefits of jogging, it is more likely to predict a person's exercise behavior. When attitudes are potent, usually one's behavior is automatic. We act out familiar scripts without thinking about it. These mindless thoughts are adaptive. It is habitual behavior wherein conscious intentions are difficult to activate. For example, someone greeted you hi and you reply that person with hi or you just smiled. This action is the familiar script that you don't have to take your time thinking of what you will respond to others. Under this one, when attitude are potent is bringing attitude to mind. If a person is self-conscious, always thinking about the attitude before acting, he is more likely to attach to his attitude by Miller and Grush, 1986. This can be enhanced by making people aware of themselves by having them act in front of a mirror, or from the Carver and Chor, 1981. Next is forging strong attitude through experience. Experience attitude is very accessible in predicting behavior. This is from Glassman and Al-Baraksin to 2006. And can be forged by experience. If an attitude was forged by experience, it is more likely to guide action, more accessible, and more enduring. When behavior affect our attitude. A is role-playing. A role is a set of norms that show how people behave in a particular circumstances. If an individual steps into a new role, he might feel self-conscious. This person may observe his way of speech and action and may notice that it changed. Then later on, it began to fit and become comfortable with you. If we started a new role, we would enact a role that shapes our attitude. For example, a student joined a particular club in school. His attitude might change from what he used to be. He may become more conscious of himself and he may think that his behavior would be aligned in his new role. Letter B is saying becomes believing. People often enact what they say to their listeners. Usually, it is easier to say good things and adjust their message toward the listeners. Thus, people begin to believe in what they say are saying. This implies that when people say something positive to someone else, they also act positively. Letter C is the foot in the door phenomenon. Foot in the door phenomenon is a tendency to accept larger requests after agreeing to a small request. For example, a lady asks a student what way is going to registrar's office. It's a small request. After the student answers, the lady asks her to come with her going to registrar's office. It's a large request. Therefore, people commit themselves to social behaviors and perceive those acts to be their own doing. So, they are more likely to believe in what they have done. So, the lesson for this, think of what will follow before agreeing on small requests. Next, letter D is evil and moral acts. Attitudes follow behavior is also applicable to immoral acts. For example, after telling a small lie and think that it was not bad, the person is more likely to tell bigger lies. Another example is that when we tend to hurt those we dislike and also dislike those we hurt, moreover, negative actions shape an individual and also can do moral acts, especially if one is alone. He tends to reflect on what he did. For example, in one experiment, children were instructed children were instructed not to play with a robot when the instructor is not around. The experimenter uses threat to the children. The findings shows that after several weeks, children tend to resist playing with the robot. Next, letter E is the social movement. Our national, our racial and political behavior help shape our social consciousness, wherein we tend not only to stand up for what we believe in, but we also believe in what we stood up for. These political and social movements may legislate one behavior designed to lead an attitude change on a mass scale. Next is why behavior affect our attitudes. Self-presentation or the impression management. People tend to impress others to gain social and material rewards, satisfaction, and social identity security. To avoid bad impressions, people change their attitude that match their actions. To maintain a good impression, people may pretend such attitude, for example, insincerity or hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. Next, self-justification. This is cognitive dissonance. If two simultaneously accessible convictions, thought and beliefs are inconsistent, people are more likely to feel the tension. If tension has been developed, we tend to exhibit self-persuasion and justify ourselves toward consistency. Next, insufficient justification. Insufficient justification usually works for punishment and rewards. If there will be small rewards, people are more likely to have insufficient justification. For example, in an experiment, the participants, after given a simple task as an experiment, were asked to tell a little lie to the next participants or confederates. That the experiment is very interesting even if it's too simple. The participant would be given a reward if they persuaded a next participant. Those who paid $1 are more likely to have insufficient justification. Hence, they would be the most likely to adjust their attitude to their action. Those who have insufficient justification would experience more discomfort, that's the dissonance, and only believe in what they have done. On the other hand, if the participant would receive higher rewards, they became motivated to tell a lie and would have sufficient justification for what they have done and experience less dissonance. Therefore, the smallest incentives to get people to do something may lead to insufficient justification and dissonance, yet it is the most effective way of getting them to like the activity. This is because when external inducements are not enough to justify one's behavior, he tends to reduce dissonance internally by justifying the behavior. Next is dissonance after decisions. There are times that the people should decide between two favorable alternatives. One would be aware of dissonance cognition or desirable thoughts of what you have rejected and undesirable thoughts of what you have chosen on every decision. To avoid these circumstances, one reduces dissonance by increasing the chosen option and decreasing the option that you did not choose. On the other hand, with simple decision, I tend to quickly believe what he had decided. This is from Blanton and others to 2001. Next is self-perception. Self-perception theory explained that if people are unsure of their attitude, they tend to think of how other people would see them and depend on your attitude on how you behave and how your experiences occur. Under this is the expressions and attitudes. Expression Expressions also, so it's under expression and attitude. Expressions are also affect one's attitude. Notice when you Miss Universe candidate show her smile when she's performing, she helps herself be happy. If someone walks with heads up, arms swinging and eyes straight ahead, he helps himself boost his mood. But when someone sits all day with mopping posture, sigh, and reply to everyone with a down manner, he is more likely to put himself in a depressed state. Over justification and intrinsic motivation. Again, over justification and intrinsic motivation. People describe their behavior depending on what condition under which behavior occurs. If people are rewarded for doing what they enjoyed, it makes them think that their actions are due to rewards only, not because they enjoy it. This is what we call overjustification. If a dedicated photographer were paid to have a photo shoot, later on, he wouldn't do the photo shoot with no pay. Moreover, the unanticipated reward does not decrease intrinsic interest because one's action can also be attributed to intrinsic motivation. This is from Bradley and Manel, 1984, and Tang and Hall, 1995. Then therefore, it all depends on what a reward implies. It can boost one intrinsic motivation, but suppose the reward is given to control people and believe that it was the reward that caused their effort. In that case, it can diminish intrinsic motivation and the over-justification effect can occur. Next is comparison of theories. Dissonance as arousal. Dissonance or the uncomfortable tension reduces if one changes his attitude. According to self-perception theory, there would be no tension being aroused if one's attitude and action did not correspond to each other. If the attitude is weak, one can base their attitude on circumstances. Therefore, conditions that supposedly produce dissonance are indeed uncomfortably arousing. There would be unwanted consequences for which one feels responsible. It is indeed that dissonance conditions arouse tension, especially when positive feelings are self-worth and threatened. Next is self-perceiving when not self-contradicting. Dissonance theory cannot explain the idea that attitude can change without dissonance. It is also explained that over-justification effect being rewarded should not arouse great tension. It also cannot explain self-perception theory wherein there could always be a situation that can describe an action and doesn't contradict any attitude. Thus, dissonance theory that self-persuasion after acting contrary to one's attitude can induce an uncomfortable feeling. This is why, if one's argue the position that in line with their opinion, they tend to eliminate one's arousal and not the attitude. In simple terms, dissonance theory explains that attitude change. We feel tension, so we adjust our attitude to reduce it. Three competing theories explain why action affect our attitude reports. Number one is self-presentation theory. Assumes that people, especially those who self-monitor their behavior, hoping to create good impressions, will adapt their attitude report to appear consistent with their action. The available evidence confirms that people do adjust their attitude statement out of the concern of what other people will think. But it also shows that some genuine attitude change occur. Two of these theories propose that our action trigger genuine attitude change. Number one is dissonance theory. Explain this attitude change by assuming that we feel tension after acting contrary to our attitude or making difficult decisions. To reduce that arousal, we internally justify our behavior. Dissonance theory further proposes that the less external justification we have for or undesirable action, the more we feel responsible for them. And thus, the more dissonance arises and the more attitude change. Next is self-perception theory. Self-perception theory assumes that when an attitude are weak, we simply observe our behavior and circumstances and then infer our attitude. One interesting implication of self-perception theory is the over-justification effect. Rewarding people to do what they like doing anyway can turn their pleasure into drudgery. If the rewards leads them to the attribute their behavior to the reward. Evidence, evidence, evidence supports prediction from both for both theories, suggesting that each describe what happened under certain condition. We have here the essay, but we're going to do the glossary. Let's go to glossary number 1. Role. A set of norms that defines how people in a given social position ought to behave. Number 2 is put in the door phenomenon. The tendency of people who have first agreed a small request to comply later with the largest request. So that's foot in the door phenomenon. Next is low ball technique. The tactic for getting people to agree to something. People who agree to an initial request will often still comply when the requester ups the ante. People who believes only costly requests are less likely to comply with them. Next is cognitive dissonance. Tension arises when one is simultaneously aware of the inconsistent conditions. For example, dissonance may occur when we realize that we have a little justification acted contrary to our attitude and or made a decision favoring one's alternative despite reason favoring another. Next is self-perception theory. The theory that when we are unsure of attitudes, we're not unsure of our attitude, we infer them much as would someone observing us. By looking at our behavior and the circumstances people do, what they already like doing. They may then see action as externally controlled rather than intrinsically appealing. Again, the references is from Mayer G. 2012, Social Psychology 11th edition, McGraw-Hill Higher Education. Next is Mayer's G. 2014, Exploring Social Psychology 7th edition, McGraw-Hill Higher Education. Ayun lamang po at maraming salamat sa pagsama niyo sa akin sa module reading ng Social Psychology. Our topic for today once again is the behavior and attitude. At hanggang dito na lamang po ang ating module reading. Maraming salamat po sa mga sumama sa akin. Maraming salamat po ulit. Ako'y matutulog na. Paalam. Thank you po. See you tomorrow.